Is it loading for everyone? Can someone do a hands? Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, the binder loaded for me. I have a working notebook.
Okay.
Yeah, now also for me, it took a bit, but now it's coming.
Okay, I also wanted to ask one question, like Tishi. So I know what to expect. I'm going to ask, I think, 3 questions and use yes if it fits for you, and just leave your yes up. So first of all, who has access to S3 storage today? So I have a couple of yeses, a couple of nos. Okay. Mostly no's. It's very unfortunate for all of you. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Well, answer yes if you have used S3 before. I assume if you haven't, you have used it. Okay. And who even knows what it is? Can you say yes if you know what it is? Okay. Anyone else? All right, so let's start off with a few basics. There are many S3 servers in the world. Amazon developed the specification, and they tend to assume that you're using their S3, but more and more people are providing these servers. So the one we'll be using today is from Imble, not from Amazon. So there are several Amazon S3 servers in Europe and all over the world. We'll be using the one from Imble because they were kind enough to let us have write access to it. So you get to write into it. The one that we have in the Embassy Cloud, you can't have write access to it. You can only read from it, right? Interestingly, you can spin up your own S3 server if you want. There's a project that we'll be using today called min.io. I'll type it in. And it will let you, if you have, hard drives, you could start up your own S3. In fact, Imble's S3 is min.io. So these are all kind of things that you have to figure out with your IT department. What's available, what can we use, etc. Everything that goes into an S3 must live in a bucket. The bucket we're using today is called BioIm for bioimaging. And all of the authentication happens at the bucket level. So you will get a password from me in just a moment. And at some point in the notebook, it will ask you for the password, and that's your access to the bucket. You can have multiple users, but typically you don't. So you almost think of the buckets as like a project that you're sharing with people, right? It's a place to organize the data. You don't want millions of buckets. You probably only want tens or hundreds of buckets at the most. Keys, or the objects, you can have as many as you want, right? You can have millions or billions. That's where you really organize your data. So the naming of the keys is quite important, because remember, you don't want to move them once you put the data in. And this whole thing together is the identifier for what we'll be looking at, and we'll see several of them. Flipping back and forth between PowerPoint and the browser is getting confusing. So I'll just go to the browser. So I put this into place for everyone, so you can look at this browser and see what's in our bucket. So this is what we'll be playing with today. Typically, you can't browse an S3 bucket. So if you just go to, if you say, someone tells you, we're using S3 Imble, the bucket BioImaging, this will actually take quite a while to load, and it'll be garbage. And that's confusing for people. Actually, I don't even know if it's loading. But I want to show you the scary part in case it happens to you. I'll show you the IDR bucket. Maybe I won't. So I'll tell everyone a story. Last night, all of my servers went down. And so this has been very exciting. There it goes. Okay. So we'll ignore the IDR one. This is the type of output you'll see if you just go to someone's S3 storage. What this is telling you is some of what's in the bucket, but it's not doing it in a very friendly way. So if you see this, you have to back up and, use some of the tools that we'll be showing you to access the storage. Like I said, S3 is in object storage in general. It's very different from what you're used to with file systems. So this is a bit of a conditioning yourself for how you work with it. This browser is HTML that I put into place. It's much more friendly. You can build up friendly things to access the data. And that's really the tools that Tishi and I will be showing you. Take what you've put into S3 and make them friendly for your users. Okay. Is there anything else from the presentation that's important? Those are just screenshots of what we'll be looking at. So I'm going to close out PowerPoint. And now this is the process that I need to do to spin up Jupyter locally. This should let me do what all of you should have in your browser by now. If anyone is having problems loading the ngf1 URL that I sent, please let me know. And now the notebook should start up for me. And I'll open the workshop notebook that all of you are in. All right. So Peter went through a notebook yesterday as well. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what he said to begin with, just to make sure we're all comfortable with going through a notebook. So we'll look at the software that we're using. We'll talk briefly about how the notebook works, and then we'll get to these steps that I talked about. We're going to download data, convert it, and then publish it. And if we have any time at the end before we want to take a break, we'll look at some extras, but if not, you're welcome to, access this notebook whenever you would like. As Peter also pointed out, the only thing that I expect to change is that eventually the password for S3 will go away. Right, Christian? What do you expect?
I don't know. I have to ask our IT department.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have permission yet to promise that it'll stay there forever. So you should assume it'll go away. I don't put anything important. 1 second. Okay. So like I showed you just a second ago in the terminal, I used Conda in Jupyter. Answering Kin's question. To spin up this notebook, you don't necessarily need the notebook. Everything we're doing, you can install locally. I'm just using it because it meant that you all didn't need to install anything before the meeting, right? So it's an easy way to give you access to it. The two tools that are important are bioformats to raw, which I've already talked about, and the Minio client. So I mentioned Minio, and we're using their command line tool to do all the moving about of data. It's much more friendly than the tool from Amazon. And then we have various other things that are installed that, depending on what everyone asks, may become useful, but I won't go through them. Okay, so far we haven't had anything to run. So now we start running things in the notebook, starting at point 1. I assume most of you are familiar with the run button. So if you're on a cell and you click run, that was a markdown cell. So it was only text, so nothing happened. If you have a cell that has a number in front of it, it's something that will actually run. As Peter pointed out, Very briefly, it will turn to an asterisk, and then when it's finished, it'll print out where we are. The exclamation point at the beginning of all of my lines is because I'm using the command line. So I'm cheating to some degree. We're not going to be programming Python or anything. We're just using this as a nice terminal. So almost all of my commands end with begin with an exclamation mark. And if you install bioformats to raw and the Minio client locally, then you can use this. You would just type in pwd, not the exclamation point. And what it's telling you is that we are in this directory. You are probably in a directory called home Jovian, because that's how the Jupyter notebooks work on my binder. And I linked to an explanation of why that is if you'd like to read it. Okay, so in the directory, there's a subdirectory called binder, and in the binder directory, there's a file called environment YAML. If you use conda, then this environment file will let you install everything I'm using today. So it would let you reproduce what we're working on, if that's interesting to you. That's really up to you, and we can discuss the pros and the cons. Okay. I'm not going to use the run button anymore. I'm going to use shift return. So as we progress through, you won't see me going up here to click, but you can keep clicking through with run. Okay, I'm going to go through. And now we're going to start looking at the Minio client. It's called MC for short. This is its help command. It actually has quite a number of options. So it's good for uploading data, downloading data, deleting your data on S3, creating your buckets, changing the permission on your buckets. Most anything you want to do, you should be able to do it. Amazon, for example, if you choose you want to put your data up on the Amazon S3 storage, you can do all of this from the browser. I won't go through that today, but that's something we could certainly help someone go through in the future. Okay. So now I'm enter. So the first thing we're going to do with MC with a Minio client is look at the hosts that we are configured to use. I've talked about endpoints and buckets and keys. The other important terms you need to know are access key and secret key. So when you set up your S3 storage, or when you ask your IT for a storage contingent, they will give you an access key and a secret key. Often they are unreadable. Everyone has access to one S3 bucket because the MinIO team provides it for you. So if you run this cell, if you run it locally, you'll see that you have access to something called Play. It's the Play server. It already has an access key and a secret key, and you can upload anything you want. Now, I've never hit a storage limit, but I do know they delete everything probably once an hour or so. So again, it's fine if you want to show a colleague an image quickly. And in fact, we could do that later if anyone wants to, but don't put anything that you actually care about there. And the entire world can see it, right? So now it's time for us to load our permissions, our access key and secret key. This is the secret key. It's like a 40 or 30 key, oh, excuse me. And here it's going to ask me for it, and I paste it, and I can't read it. This is also that when I uploaded this notebook to GitHub, the world couldn't see our secret key, right? I hit enter. It still doesn't show me what's happening. And then this next command should add, oh, something's gone wrong. I don't know what. Hopefully it's working for all of you. If things go wrong and are stuck in a running phase, you can hit the square and it'll interrupt it. Let's go back. Good, it's working for other people. It's just not working for me. That's fair. So let's interrupt. Now it's asking me for the password again. I enter it, and then I enter, and it says GBI added successfully. Okay, so now we have permission to access this server. And so I'm going to get a listing of everything that's in our server, our endpoint, in our BioIM bucket. And this is the same output that we saw in the browser earlier, right? So now we can do the same thing that we did with the HTML. I've prepared various data files if anyone wants to access them. The bigger ones are under the IDR62 TIFFs subdirectory. You can see them there and you see their sizes. The largest are about 120 megabytes. It's nothing too terribly large. We have someone joining us. They're probably going to have issues following along if someone can help them out in the chat. I think the name was Bertrand. And so these are all the IDR images that Peter told you about in the past 2 days. And he kept saying, Josh, we'll talk about these. So I went ahead and I uploaded all of them. And in the IDR, we've already transformed all of them. And those are all under the IDR62 ZARs directory. So you can have access to all of them now. They're all CC by. All the data is in the IDR. However, I realized when practicing all of this that if all of us, and I wasn't sure how many people were going to be here, all try to do, download 100 megabytes and upload 100 megabytes all at the same time, things get wacky. So I have a much, much smaller example that we're actually going to use, which is from IDR 23, this trans norm TIFF. So thanks, Will. So now it's time for your first download. So far, we've just been looking at things. We haven't really done anything. So now, first download. We're going to download the trans norm TIFF into your temp directory. If you run that cell, it won't take long, but you'll actually see something happening. That's a nice first experience with S3. And then you can see the file listed on disk, right? I'm going to take a second. My voice is getting rough. Give anyone a second to ask a question if they're having problems. Hopefully Bertrand is getting caught up. I'm going to mute myself so I can properly cough one time. Okay, so I'm assuming everyone's doing all right. And in just a moment, we'll know whether or not everyone is doing all right because you get to upload something with your own name on it. Thank you for whoever gave the thumbs up. Feedback is nice. And as I said in the beginning, anyone who would like to turn on their video, feel free. It would actually be nice to be in a single room with all of you. Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, I'm unable to validate source. I have an error.
Oh, you have an error.
I have an error. You are not the only one with errors. Today we have 3 microscopes with errors. Of course, I'm going to have an error now.
Like I said, my server fell over yesterday, so I understand completely. So you have a problem here on line 19?
Yes, or 9. I have line 9.
You're on line 9.
But they said your first download. I mean, it have been my configuration. They have added GVI successful. Everything looks so good, except when I try to run and tell them.
And if you rerun it, if you click back on it and hit run again, will it same error?
Yeah, let's. Yeah, I get an error. They don't like me.
They don't like you. That's going to be difficult if.
It's always like that. I can live with that.
But these commands up here, they all worked. Why don't you try storing it somewhere different? Change this bit at the end and see if I'll fix it for you.
Okay.
If we do, what happens?
I changed it for that. Let me do. What did you write with a space? Okay, let's run it. No. Yeah, I think I have exactly what you have there. Maybe you can continue and check me later if but I think I have been successful. I mean, with the password and everything, they say successful.
Worst case, maybe what you can do is go to kernel and just restart the whole thing and go from top to bottom and get caught up with us. And we'll keep going and then I'll help you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, that's no fun. Yeah, Christian?
Julia, can you copy and paste the line that you try to run into the chat? Then I can try on my...
Yeah, well, now I change it, but I will...
Okay, so we're going to assume everyone can help Julia in the chat, and we'll keep going. Yeah? Ken?
Just to make sure that I understand. So the IDR 0062 TIFFs are the original TIFF, and the 0062 stars are the conversion of stars. Right, that's all those. Am I correct on that?
Completely, yes.
Okay. But and there are no direct, how they say that, because they're all separate into chunks, so there are no direct relationships between the two. Am I correct too?
Yeah, so I mean, if every pixel is the same, but it's a very different format of the data. Okay. You know, so these are directories, and actually let's go to the browser and look. Oh, sorry. So let's look at what Ken was talking about. I'll make this a bit bigger. Okay, so these are the ZARs that were produced, and if we click on one of them, lots of people are doing things. Then you get this, directories of lots of stuff. And if you start off with a 0, because this is the 0th resolution, inside of it, you get a bunch of numbered files. And these are the chunks. And the chunks are organized. The first 0 means 0 time point, 0 channel, 11th Z slice, 0th pixel, 0th top left chunk, right? So the number is for the number of the chunk, not for the number of the pixel. And then inside this chunk file, as Christian said, you have all the data that's continuous on your disk. So if we just do it in 2D, 0, 0, 0, 0 is all the data up here. And then you go over and you have all the data next to it, and then you have all the data next to it. So we're organizing things and as opposed to rows into multi-dimensional chunks, right? Okay, so let's go back to the notebook. Now we're to point 3. I'm really sorry, Julia. You'll get a special session.
I have removed, if I remove julia.tiff, I get something, name and everything. Is that where it will be correct? I get something if I just remove my name.
If you just
run.
Paste us what is working for you, and then we can talk about it.
Yeah, and then I get the name, Osage, Black.
No, if you don't have the name, then it's basically giving you a usage message to tell you how you should be using it. You need the name to tell you where to copy it.
Okay.
I'd almost go back to my URL and start fresh. If you're the only person having problems.
Okay, I will try to do that. Thank you.
Good now, start just chunking. Okay, so we're gonna start with bioformats to raw. This is kind of the scary output, but I wanted to include it because there are quite a lot of options for performance optimization. So with the IDR, we have to transform 200 terabytes of data, right? And that's going to be a difficult process. So when you get to the point where you want to transform a lot of data, these options will become important, right? The number of workers and how you want to structure it and various knobs to turn. The only 2 bits that we really care about today are choosing the file type. Your notebook should be running, Nadia, in the cloud. So everyone's using the cloud because that was the easiest way, but you can also run it locally, and we can help you to do that later. Unless you already did it, which is great. So the first thing, currently the default option for bioformats to raw isn't ZAR, it's N5. So we want to choose ZAR. In the future, actually in the next version, the default will be ZAR, and you won't need to type this. And you can change the dimension order. So someone asked, about what about multiple channels? And if you know that you're accessing data in a particular way, maybe you want to have one dimension before the other dimension to speed things up. Currently, though, there's only one dimensionality that we're supporting in ZAR, and that's the 3D volume, as it typically is, and then the channels, and then the time points. But this will change going down the road too, and will become more flexible, and you can choose different ways of storage. So this very long command, although it's kind of scary, does all the hard work for us. And you don't need to change it, you just need to, give it a different file that you're running. So I'm going to run it. You'll see about how long it takes, but this is for the very small 2 megabyte file. It prints a lot of output. You don't really need all the output, but if something goes wrong, we will ask you for the output, right? So for us, it's quite useful. So that's fine. Now I've put it in this directory called transnorm out. You need to put it somewhere. You see you have 2 files. You have the ZAR file, and you have an OME XML file that has all the metadata that bioformats to raw knew about the file itself. So ZAR so far is primarily a specification for the binary data. We're working to put all of the OME XML metadata into the ZAR file, but that's not ready yet. So at the moment, you get these 2 things, and you might want to keep both of them. We're not going to use the OME XML file today, though. And then if we look, so this is a bit more complicated command. We're going to look for all the files that start with Z in the directory, and you can see there's 5 of them. And these are the important bits of the ZAR data structure. What they do is they hold it together. They say the Z attribute files have all the metadata in JSON in them, and you can add attributes anywhere you go. So, and then you have 2 basic concepts. You have groups, which are really just directory structures, holders for more data. And you have the arrays. And the array is what gets broken up into chunk. And those are really all of the nouns that you have when working with a ZAR. So I'm not going to go into those in detail. We can talk about them more. But with those few primitives, I think you can actually build up quite complicated systems. Okay, this is the first time we're really going to work with an OME ZAR. We have a Python tool called OME ZAR, and it has a command called info. Let me make this a bit larger. And what it does is it reads whatever you give it, and it tells you what it's detected. So it's detected that this is a multi-resolution image, and this is its dimensionality, right? Very, very small, because we're trying to save space. But if this returns you an error, like I get rid of the 0 at the end of the command, and it'll say, this isn't an OME ZAR. If I run it, it'll say, this isn't an OME ZAR. Why is it not telling me? Oh. Tell me it's not an OME ZAR, please. Thank you. It says it's not an OME ZAR. Does it? So this is probably one of the biggest confusions that we can have at the moment with what bioformats to raw is producing. So let me take a step back. In bioformats, so actually in any of your file formats that's coming off the microscope, you may have many, many images in one file, right? So far, we've showed you TIFF files that have one image in it, but that's not even really the norm. You can have, especially for example, in whole slide imaging, you have the small overview image and you have other things. What bioformats to raw does is it takes all of the images that it finds and it puts them in separate directories with a 0. So even though this 0 looks quite unassuming, it's actually the directory what we want. It's a bit unfortunate. We can try to make that nicer going forward, but for now, just remember that you could have hundreds of numbers under the data czar, and each of those is its own special image. Okay, so now it's time for us to publish, right? So we've actually done our work, and we can open this file if we want. So the next cell, you actually have to enter something. And I want you to enter something so that you're not all uploading your data to my directory. You can type whatever you want. I guess you can type Josh if you want to, but pick something else, because then we'll see how many people have actually followed along. And then the next cell, when we run it, will kick off the upload. It's also fairly fast. It takes about 20 seconds. But we can watch it uploading each of the individual chunks. So you can see there's the 571 chunks that each get uploaded separately. Now, part of this is because we're running in the cloud and we're running in the browser. Clearly, if you start to do this at scale, if you really want to publish a lot of data, you need to work with your IT to make sure this is as fast as possible. And that's probably the hardest part of all of this. The conversion we can help you with, but for you to get your data from wherever you have it onto your S3 is probably the hardest part, right? So keep that in mind. The good thing about it is once you've done it, your users don't have to worry about it anymore. So that's where we're trying to get to. So the next cell, I'm just going to look at one of the files. I print out one of these attribute files and I see, yeah, it looks like I'm expecting. You don't have to worry too much about what's in it. And then finally, so now this is like where someone does the drum roll and the whole shebang. We're going to look at what we just uploaded. And it's very, very not exciting because it's really tiny, right? The browser that we're using, so I put information about the browser we're using down here in the text. It's called VZAR. It's all written in JavaScript. Usually it lives at this URL, but for technical reasons, that wasn't working with the server in Imble as of last night. Sorry about the problem. So what I've done is I've just copied the JavaScript to this URL. So we've published, okay, this is a little bit complicated, but I find it quite powerful. We've published the browser for our S3 data in S3, right? That's kind of neat. That means the browser lives with the data. So let's actually use a different tool to look at this. I don't know who's heard of Napari before, but Napari, so that was all in JavaScript.
Josh, it's working again in the browser somehow for me.
This URL is working in the browser?
Yeah, I will put the URL maybe in the chat. So what happens if people click on it?
Yes, so that URL should work for everyone. And all I've done here is embedded it in the notebook.
Okay, you wanted to show it because then it opens in the website.
Yeah, I can do that as well. Oh, sorry, my phone's ringing. And so I guess here we're looking at Tishy's image. I can't make that stop, I'm sorry. Yeah, so there's Tishy's image in the browser and all of you can do the same. And then we can do the same thing with a Python client called Napari. That has to be done from the command line. So I didn't try to build this into the notebook for you. If anyone's interested, we can talk about Napari during the extra time. So it'll load for a second. The reason I want to show you the second view, well, one is because it's nice that you have multiple viewers that you can use to view, and Tishy is going to show you another one, right? He's going to show you image J. But the browser viewer is 2D, so if we go back to the browser, all I can do is take this Z slider and move back and forth, and you don't really get a feel for the data. But by clicking on this box down here in Napari, you can have a 3D view, and then you get a much nicer wow effect, right? So the data is kind of interesting, but only when you have a 3D viewer. We're working on 3D viewers for the browser for OMEZAR, but they're not ready yet. But when they do, we'll publish them and tweet about them and put a blog post about them and do the regular stuff. Okay, so we're almost done with the notebook. If I can find my notebook. We're into extras. Like I said, I had already uploaded some of the bigger data. It looks like this. It's also exciting to look at in Napari because it's this volume of cells, almost spherical. There's one gotcha I wanted to mention, which is when you're renaming things on S3, like even if you just want, you have a typo and you just want to move your bucket from, I put 2 O's in Josh or something, you actually must fully recopy the data. So be careful with S3. Remember, everything's immutable, so it's not like moving things on a file system. And the final bit, I won't go through it, but if you want to explore it in the future, we have another tool called Omero CLI ZAR. So if you have an Omero, or if you want to access the workshop server that Peter set up for you, you can actually export images directly. So if you know your image ID and you can log into the server, you can actually download something. Here it took about 2 minutes to download one of the bigger images. And here you can see I have it locally. Few other bits at the bottom. We have a blog post that has much more data. If you'd like to look at it, feel free to follow that. And a nice chart from Will basically showing how all the pieces fit together, including Omero, if you want to look at it. I think that's it for me. We're about 5 minutes over. Does anyone have questions? Actually, let's go see how many people were successful before I quit. I'm going to go back to the browser application. Bertrand Frauche. So we had about 6 or 7 people who participated. Thank you very much. You get a golden star. Thank you, Stefan. I'm glad no one actually deleted all the data. So that would have been potentially possible if you had wanted to do that to each other, but we'll assume we're all being nice.
So I got to the upload step, but it's still running. It's never completed for me. So there may be a lot of people who got to a similar point.
Is anyone else having a problem with the upload step? No one said anything. Ken's asking an unrelated question.
What is upload step? I don't have any problems. I think I'm almost at the end of the notebook.
So the important upload step, the one that makes things possible, is this one with the copy.
Passed without problems. I'm already viewing the thing in Vizar.
That's actually a great question, Ken. Let me answer that loud. So if everyone looks at the last question in the chat, let me type in, actually, yeah, I'll just type in what Ken tried. So, because it does make sense, Ken, you're right. So we'll make a new cell. And what Ken is asking is why doesn't, well, if this command worked, ask Ken, why, oops, sorry, if this command work, why doesn't this one work? I'll use my name. You'll get error, not a czar, right? So the reason is that OMEZAR knows nothing of MC, right? So this GBI that we logged into, it's like a server. It's like a SSH server. So you could almost imagine having a S3 here. So if we want this to work, we would have to type in HTTPS S3 imble DE, and that should, oh, excuse me, that should work. Run. Yeah. So the S3, sorry, so the GBI is a shortcut for this longer URL. That also includes our login information. Thank you. I will include that in the next notebook. Very nice of you. Anyone else have a question? I'm going to stop sharing. And we can all shake it out, do some yoga.
Maybe I can say why this is all cool. Maybe because I think I find it fascinating because you can share image data like this with the whole world, and you don't need, I mean, it looks now complicated, but you need, so this S3 technology is in principle standard, right? So for example, if you would do this now via BioImage Archive or Mero, there's all this, you know, database structure and a lot of work of people behind. And this way that Joss was showing is very, you know, you need none of this. It's just kind of standard technology, and you can share data with everyone. So I think that's maybe something to say.
Yeah, so that URL, so the, you know, this URL, so the, just the S3 URL is your data and it's public and you don't need a Nomero anymore. The longer URL is then a viewer for your data. What we'll see when it's Tishy's turn is that you can take the URL and put it into image J and view your data. So that's the only thing you need to share. So if we're thinking about, you know, DOIs or something for your data, that URL is it. You've published, you're done. As long as your storage doesn't disappear like mine did yesterday.